Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at the pinnacle of my boredom as I sit here and mine in Runescape for probably the 10th hour straight, hoping to finally free myself from this awful mining grind. I've been wondering how bad my luck is when I do certain bosses, or how good it is. And one of the ways you can find that out in Runescape is to use a drop chance calculator, because you're too inept to do your own math. You just go find a calculator that does it for you. Or maybe you're just too lazy to do it. Here, effectively, what we have is a calculator that tells you what the chances are of seeing an item depending on how many times you do an activity. In this case, it's fighting a boss. Every time you fight the boss, it has a 1% chance of dropping an item, or a 1 in 100 chance of dropping an item. I've done that boss 647 times, and I've only received the item once. I would like to have seen it 6 times, because that would be a nice even number, but unfortunately, I'm having a bit of a dry streak here. There's other calculators that work like this, like there's one on the wiki, where you can put in your chance of a drop, the number of kills, and then the number of tames so far, and it tells you what your chances are of being this bad at the game. Apparently, I am a very top-tier baddie, but you get the idea. We're just making a simple calculator that's going to use some statistics, binomial distribution, more specifically, to calculate the odds or the probabilities of these things happening. If you're not familiar with binomial distribution, there is a lovely, helpful thing on the wiki page. And they got a couple of formulas in here that are kind of scary, but these really translate very nicely into actual functions. If you see a summation, which we'll see down here for the cumulative distribution function, a summation means it's just a for loop from the bottom term to the top term, which in this case would be I equals 0 to the floor of k. We then have the binomial coefficient. We have p to the I, which we can just use a math.power for. And we have this function right here, which again is just going to be whatever's inside to the power of whatever's outside, which we already have available to us in like the math libraries, right? All of that's pretty simple, but it gets even easier if you use something called the JStat library. This is the JavaScript statistical library. This is one of the more up-to-date ones. They have various functions in the library that allow you to just call jstat.binomial.PDF to get your PDF, and binomial.cdf to get your CDF. If you're not familiar with what these are, they're just variations on the binomial distribution. You got the cumulative distribution function, which is your CDF, and then you should have your probability mass function, which is your PMF. And then there's also a probability density function for, I believe, continuous probabilities as opposed to discrete. But we'll be taking a look at mostly just the CDF for this. And the way we're going to do that is just through a quick little helper call. So let's take a look at how to actually do this. Not terribly difficult. In fact, you can probably do this while you're mining off camera. But let's get started. Let's say Rails new video, and then we'll CD into there. We don't actually have to run a code doc because I already have VS Code open over here. And that'll go ahead and run for us. Now, while that's running, we do have a schema that we need to make, which is similar to what we see on the screen right here. We have the item name, the drop chance, the boss kills per drop, number of drops. So we're just going to convert the schema into something we can type right here. The way we can do that is with a Rails G scaffold. We're going to say this is going to be our drop rates table, and then we'll give this all of these various things. We'll start with a item name of type string, a drop chance of type float, a boss kills of type integer, a kills per drop of type integer, and a number of drops of type integer. Go ahead and run that. And then the other thing we need is a stimulus controller for a drop rate controller as well. And that's pretty much all we have to do here. We can then go ahead and run a Rails S to start our server. And I'll move my notes over to the side because you probably don't want to look at them the whole time. And then we can go ahead and get started on the rest of this. So what do we have to do? Well, let's come into our routes real quick. This is inside of our config and our routes.rb. Let's just set the root to be the drop rates controller index action. We can come over to localhost port 3000 now, and hopefully after we run our migrations, by clicking run pending migrations, we'll see that we have a drop rates thing right here. Let's click on that, and it lets me make some stuff. I'm just going to say this is for a dragon pick, because there's like a pickaxe of a specific type in the game. We'll just go ahead and we'll click create. The rest of these are blank. That's no big deal. Let's now come over to our app controllers, drop rates controller. We're going to change the update here to literally just update the drop rate based on the parameters. That way we can do this without needing to refresh a little bit easier. You could, of course, make your own route. but I'm being really lazy here, so we're just going to do it this way. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and close our drop rates controller, and let's come into our views, our drop rates, and our drop rate partial. In our drop rate partial itself, all I really want to do is, instead of all of this, I just want to render the form with the locals of the drop rate being passed in. So we're just taking everything else out of here. If we now refresh this page, you'll see that our show page now just has the form in it. But if we come over here, we can click on like new drop rate. We can say, I don't know, rune longsword, and click create. Go back to the home page, and now we have a dragon pick and a rune longsword. We can deal with both of these. So the reason why we're doing this is now we just have this list, and we can update these as needed, as opposed to needing to like click on show for each of them. There's of course cleaner ways to do this, but this is kind of what I was after when I started making this. All right, now in our form, let's go ahead and let's do some of the hard stuff. First thing we want to do is tell the form to use our controller. To do that, we just do a comma with some data, and then inside of some braces, we just tell the form the controller it should use is the drop dash rate controller. Now, remember in our JavaScript controllers, drop rate controller, we have this underscore or drop underscore rate controller that we generated earlier, but because of how Stimulus and Rails work together, that's now a drop dash rate instead of a drop underscore rate. We're going to be moving between snake case, which is the underscores, and kebab case, which is this dash, quite a few times, depending on what type of code we're writing. So just be aware if it's switching between one or the other, it's just because of some weird, cringy little quirk that happens in Rails. But okay, we have our drop rate for our controller. Let's go ahead and let's add two more things. One's going to be a target. This target is so that we can reference this form if we need to. Now this really isn't necessary. You can also just call like this.element. If we do a console.log, we can say hello stimulus and this.element. And then if we come over here, hit Control-Shift-I and refresh. Whenever we actually save our form here and then refresh, we'll see hello stimulus, and we have access to the entire form. So we don't actually need this drop rate target form, but this is another way where you could then do something like, instead of this, we could have a static set of targets, which is equal to a form. And then instead of doing this dot element, we could do this dot form target, right? We can refresh, and it's going to be the same thing. So we can use this form target in other areas instead of just calling it form target. Maybe we call this like, I don't know, the drop chance target. And we can grab the drop chance to see specifically what's available on the page. But okay, I'm going to get rid of this drop rate target. We don't need that. And we'll just go with the, we'll go with this dot element instead. But there are some other things we have to put in this targets list. Let's come back over to our form, and let's just finish this up real quick. We're not really going to be dealing with any of these errors. We are not going to be changing the item name, but the rest of these need to change quite a bit. We'll just copy and paste each one of these, and I'll walk you through what they are. First is our drop chance. For our drop chance, we want to change this to be a class of field. Label doesn't change. It's a number field for the drop chance with a step size of however many decimals you want to allow. In this case, I have it set to like 6, I think. We then have a value, which we're just setting equal to our drop rate right up here, dot drop chance. And then if we don't have a drop chance, we just set it equal to 0. Similarly, if we want to make sure we're on the updates page, we're using the drop rate ID value up here. This is grabbing the drop rate.id if we're on the update page, like all of these are technically the update page, or it's 0 if we're on a new page. This will allow us to check if our drop rate ID value is 0. And if it is, we know we're on a new page. So we shouldn't update when we like change our drop chance. But if we're on a page that already exists, like this dragon pick page, when we do these changes, we want to automatically update the changes so that the user doesn't have to click update each time. But okay, let's come back to the root of our application and let's finish up here. We have, after the value, we have some data. The data is going to be similar for all of these. Basically, what we're telling the stimulus controller is the name of this thing as a target, which is this field we're going to call drop chance. So then we can say drop chance.value, for example, to figure out what's in our drop chance field. And then we give it some actions, which are just like methods that we want to call depending on what happens. So if the user does anything input related in this drop chance field, like adds a number, we then want to call the drop dash rate controller and the convert to kills per drop action. Similarly, we want to call the drop rate controller and the submit form on change action so we can remotely update this. This allows us to see which one of these things is like updating the form whenever it changes. We're going to do pretty much the same thing for the rest of these fields. We have our boss kills right here. Let's go ahead and let's update that. Our boss kills is going to be virtually identical, no step size, but we do give this a calculate received probability action. We then have our kills per drop, which is going to be moved up a bit. We're going to move the kills per drop up to the top because that makes more sense to me. So we'll put this like up here, right below the item name. And then we can just replace this with another field. So it's going to be kills per drop. Again, it's the kills per drop or it's 0 if that doesn't exist. Our target is just kills per drop. We convert this to a percentage on change, and then we do a form submission, and that's pretty much it there. The final one we have to do is the number of drops, and you'll never believe it, but this looks pretty much the same as the rest of them. Our number of drops, again, number of drops, number field for the number of drops has a minimum value of 0 because it doesn't make sense for you to receive -1 logs after you cut a tree. You have a value of number of drops or 0, and then we have some data here. Again, target is the number of drops, just the variable name. We then calculate the received probability, and we do a form submit on change. So let's go ahead and let's do the actual stimulus controller so we can finish up here. And come over to the stimulus controller. This is unfortunately where a lot of the actual logic is going to be, but I'll help to walk you through it as best I can. To start with, let's do the targets. The targets are going to be everything we had over here in the form. We don't need this form, but the rest of these are just the inputs so that we can access them in a similar way to what we were doing before. We're then going to start by implementing the calculate received probability. We'll come down here, say calculate received probability. And in here, we just need to do some things. First, we need to parse some of these numbers. We're going to parse the drop chance, the boss kills, and the number of drops. We can then do a guard clause that just checks if the drop chance is less than 0 or the boss kills is less than 0 or the number of drops is less than 0. We can just call a update result text method, which we'll create in a second here, and we just pass in zeros for everything. Now, what does that method look like? Well, we'll just go ahead and we'll put that down here. Our update result text takes in the at least, exactly, and less than. Because remember, we had 3 different options for the text we were displaying below the drop rates. And then we'll just go through here. We'll say the number of drops is equal to whatever is in the number of drops target. And then we do a quick check. If that number of drops is equal to 1, we make the text say like you had a blank chance of getting at least 1 drop. If it's more than 1, like let's say 3, then we say you had a blank chance of getting at least 3 drops. So we're just doing like the effective Rails pluralize method just to clean this up a bit. After we do that, we then set the result target.innerHTML. Now for this result target, we actually need to define this. This is just where we're going to put the text that says you had a blank chance of receiving a drop. I'm going to put that at the bottom here, right above the submit, right here. I'm just going to give this a data-drop-rate-target of result, and that's fine. As long as this is inside of our controller, which it is, we are pretty much good here. We can then come back over here, and because we have a result in our targets list, we can then set the result targets in our HTML. We then say, you know, you have a whatever chance of getting at least this many drops. You have a chance of getting exactly this many drops. You have a chance of getting less than this many drops. This really isn't going to do much right now because we aren't using that anywhere, and we're just going to get a bunch of errors in our console. But this will be helpful in a minute here. We can now go ahead and collapse the update result text because we're done with that. We're going to do our little form submission helper real quick, which is just a submit form on change if this.id value. Remember, we had that value we set in our form up here. We set the drop rate ID. And if that's not equal to 0, which it shouldn't be if it has an actual ID, we're good to go. The only thing we have to do, though, is we have to tell Stimulus that this value, this ID value exists. We can do that by, instead of doing targets, doing a static values where we just say the ID is a number, then we're good to go. So that takes care of that for our form submission. And believe it or not, we're actually mostly through our methods here. I think we only have like 2 and the calculate received left to do. So let's finish up with the calculate received. At this point, we're good to start calculating our probabilities, but that means we need to use JStat. To use JStat, we're going to have to actually install it. So let's stop our server, do a bin/import map where we pin JStat. If you're using ESBuild, you can just use a yarn add JStat. If you're using NPM, you can just do like NPM I JStat. Same difference. We can then do a Rails S to start our server again. We need to import JStat, which we'll do at the top here. Import lowercase j, capital S stat from JStat. And then we can just pass in our probabilities. Now remember, for our cumulative density function, we can just say, all right, in here, if we want to get the CDF of less than m events, we can just call jstat.binomial.cdf, pass in the number of drops -1, boss kills, and the drop chance. Now we'll take a look at what these mean, but if we look at our result text, right here we can see you have a blank chance of getting at least a certain number of items, and you have a blank chance of getting less than a certain number of items. You can probably assume that the less than right here corresponds to this probability right here. And we'll take a look at what that looks like once we get the other two set up here, because it'll actually start to work, and then it's a bit easier to diagnose what's happening. For the probability of receiving at least this many items, or, for the probability of receiving at least this many items, we can just say probability at least equals 1 minus the less than m. So we're just reusing our previous calculation. This is the probability of receiving at least 2 or more items, for example. This is the probability of receiving fewer than 2 items. So you see how those two kind of complement each other. The last thing we have to do here is already kind of done for us. But if you want to have a little bit cleaner code, you can just rename the variable, which is just going to be the probability less than, which is just equal to our CDF itself. We then call update result text, and we can pass in the probability of at least, the probability of exactly 1 item, and the probability of less than however many items. So here you could also just get rid of this less than and just pass in the CDF, but I think that's a little bit less readable than this way. And it's really only one extra variable, right? So I think this is probably good. Now, the only other things we have to do are handle the cases where if we change like the kills per drop, we want the drop chance to update. So if we say you have like a 1 in 100 chance of getting an item, we want this to change to 0.01% chance of getting an item, or 0.01 of getting an item, which when you multiply by 100 will give you 1%, right? So to do that, we need to convert back and forth. And in our form, we already had these convert to percentage and convert to kills drop methods firing when we update either of these fields. So let's go ahead and let's do this. Let's do the percentage first. We'll do that up here right above the calculate received probability. We have convert to percentage. And what we want to do here is just say the kills per drop is the parsed value of the kills per drop. If that's less than or equal to 0, we just set the value to 0. This is just to guard against the case where we're saying you have like a -5 chance of receiving a drop. That doesn't really make sense. And if the value, or if the value was valid, we can then calculate the drop chance by just saying 1 divided by the kills per drop. We call .toFixed with a value of 6 to fix this to 6 decimal places. After this is converted, we then call calculate received probability, which is our probability distribution functions, right? Now, the inverse of this is what we're going to do for the kills per drop. We once again do a drop chance, parse value of the drop chance target instead of the kills per drop target. We do a check, make sure it's a valid value. And if it is, then we say kills per drop dot value, do the division, fix it to 0. Because our kills per drop is actually just a whole number, we're fixing this to 0 so that there's no decimal places. We once again calculate the received probability. So all of that now should allow us to hit Control-Shift-I. If we go to one of these drop rates, we'll go to the dragon pick specifically, change this to 100. And we can see it's trying to update the drop chance, but it's running into some issues. It can't, if we scroll up here, we should hopefully see that the probability exactly is not defined. So we have to come down here and we have to actually do the probability of exactly 1 drop. So let's do that, I guess, right below the CDF of less than. Do the probability exactly. So that's my fault. Totally missed that. Now let's come in here and refresh. We'll change this to 100. There we go. And now you can see these texts are updating, but they're kind of weird, right? And the reason why we're running into some issues here is the request submit is undefined. That's because of a change I made in my code here since I changed my notes. This actually needs to be this .element .request submit because this is already bound to the form, so we don't need the form target. We need this to be this .element. Now if we come in here and change this to 100, you'll see the drop chance becomes 0.01. You could of course, knock off the lagging zeros there if you want to. But now let's say we've done this, 100 times. for a 1 in 100 chance, and we've received one item. You can see here your chance of receiving at least one drop is 63.4. Your chance of getting exactly one drop is 36.97, and your chance of getting less than one drop, or 0 drops, is a 36.6% chance. Now, we can, of course, test this, right? If we come over to this drop rate calculator online, we can assume this is correct, and we'll say there's a 1 in 100 chance, which is what I have for the item I'm chasing, which is a Venator shard. 1 in 100 chance. I've done this 647 mind-numbing times, and I've received one of these items, which has a 99.85% chance of getting at least one drop. You can see right here, 647 with a 1 in 100 chance is a 99.85% chance of seeing at least one drop. So that seems to check out. At this point, you could do other things if you wanted to, but for me, I just like having this because if you come back here, we can see it's already persisted. We already have that Venator shard right here. And now let's say in the future, I come in here and I do this for 648 and I do 2, and you can see these are my chances. Now, the other thing you can do if you want to, you can have it do those, text right here off the start. And the way you do that is just up here in your on connect, you can just call the calculate received probability function, because that calls update result text at the end. So we just come in here, calculate received probability. We have to do with this dot calculate received probability. But now if we refresh, you'll see that displays for all of these. So let's do another one. This is going to be a 1 in 15 chance. We've done this 35 times. We've received 2 drops. You can see right here, these are your chances of that luck happening. Is this a practical real world application? Probably not, but it's definitely helped me at least get through the rest of my shooting star. So I guess thank you for watching. Hopefully you got something out of this. If you play RuneScape, feel free to add me. It's just Deanin. And for now, I guess thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.